Mom, Dad, and Jessie, my younger sister, went out to sea on a trip, but they were caught in a tsunami, and all three perished in the accident. I was left all alone, just as I was about to start university, burdened with nothing but a mountain of debt. In the end, everything I had saved for my university tuition, along with the house Mom and Dad had left me, was taken by debt collectors. I was then forced to work in a shady factory, laboring 16 hours a day, sleeping in a shabby 10-person dorm, and surviving on nothing but thin, flavorless broth. I finally cleared the last of the debt when I accidentally discovered that Jessie, who was supposed to be dead, had appeared on television and become a famous dancer. Mom and Dad even gave an interview about her success. It turned out they had taken out a massive loan and faked their deaths to flee to Pravia for Jessie's dance studies, leaving the entire debt for me to deal with just as I was supposed to start university. I went to confront them, demanding the truth, but they threw me out like trash. I was then hit and killed by a speeding truck at the side of the road. How could Lorraine be such a nuisance, not even having the decency to die far away from our doorstep? I have been given another chance, reborn on the day they faked their deaths. I was pulled from my dazed state after hearing the piercing wails of my grandmother, Madeline Smith. I could still feel the sensation of my bones being ground to nothing under the weight of that truck throbbing through me as I lifted my gaze to see three corpses draped in white cloth, laid out precisely within the morning hall. Grandma Madeline dissolved into a fit of inconsolable shrieking at my side. How could you pass away at such a young age, Matthias? How could you leave me, your mother, behind? I almost burst into laughter at Grandma's ridiculous claim about Mom, Dad, and my sister, Jessie Cooper, being dead. They were still alive and kicking. I couldn't help but be amazed at how impressive Grandma Madeline's acting was, despite her years. You should stop crying. You ought to let Matthias and the others go in peace, Mom, Jacqueline Cooper, my aunt, murmured, casting me a glance as she tried to calm Grandma Madeline. Aunt Jacqueline worked as a doctor in the hospital, so she was the one who issued the death certificates for Mom, Dad, and Jessie. In my past life, I had been so consumed by grief at this point that I only caught a hurried glimpse of the bodies, leaving every arrangement in Aunt Jacqueline's hands. I was then left with 3 urns and an enormous debt the following day. I watched them with a cold, detached gaze, thinking it was a hell of a performance. The 3 were perfectly alive, yet they managed to look utterly devastated for my benefit. I knew Aunt Jacqueline had to be in on the scam, since she was the one who signed the death certificates, and yet, she had kept me completely in the dark. In my past life, I had reached out to Aunt Jacqueline when the debt collectors arrived. I begged her for a loan to get me through my studies, promising to pay her back gradually once I graduated. I was turned down the first time, and by my second attempt, I found out she had applied for a study program in Gavar and had already left. In the end, I was forced to shoulder the enormous debt due to Grandma Madeline's age. I had worked so hard to get into Nexus Capital University, but I had to give it up and drop out. I was working multiple jobs every day to repay the debt, but the debt collectors weren't satisfied with the pace of my repayments. I was eventually dragged to a shady factory where I was forced to work 16 hours daily. I earned $1,500 a month, but only saw $300 of it, as the rest was funneled directly into the repayment account. I scraped by on nothing, eating bland, meatless meals for years just to clear those debts. I thought I was honoring the dead, but the whole thing had been a setup. I never thought Mom and Dad were still alive. It turned out they had taken out huge loans to take Jessie abroad to study dance, leaving the enormous debt to me. I was squeezed dry just to support Jessie's future. I was nothing more than a cash cow to them, a wallet used to fund their family's happy life. I had a front row seat to their deception in this life, so I was curious to see how they would manage to feign death and get away with it right in front of me. I stood invisible amidst the throng of relatives and friends as they offered their hollow consolations to Grandma Madeline and Aunt Jacqueline. It wasn't until Aunt Jacqueline shoved me so hard that I fell to my knees that others turned their attention to me. You worthless brat. You should have been the one who died. You're nothing but a harbinger of doom to the family. Grandma Madeline bellowed. It seemed my stoicism didn't sit well with Grandma Madeline, as she lashed out and hit me with her cane with such force that it practically stung me back to my senses. You shouldn't resort to beating, especially since she's still a young adult who doesn't know any better. Grandma Madeline, despite the relative's intervention, glared at me with fury and yelled. It was probably this wretched brat who caused the deaths of her parents and Jessie. I've always noticed how she's been gloomy and unpleasant since childhood, and now that her parents are gone, she didn't even shed a tear. I can't believe they actually raised such an ingrate in the family. I didn't bother to argue against the judgmental looks and whispers from the crowd. I simply rose to my feet, walked forward, and while no one was watching, tore off the white cloth. I collapsed onto Jessie, striking her chest with my fist before Grandma Madeline could get a word out. You're all lying to me. Mom, Dad, and Jessie are obviously still alive and well. How could they be dead? How dare you say such horrible things about them? I made sure my hair was a tangled mess as I played the part of the grieving sister pushed past the brink. I kept pounding Jessie's chest, yelling, You can't just sleep here, Jessie. You shouldn't scare me like this, Jessie. I put my back into every blow, hitting her with everything I had. I was just a sister driven mad by grief in the eyes of the onlookers, performing a frantic, hopeless resuscitation. I mused that for Jessie herself, it was likely far from comfortable though. I had to hand it to her. It must have been a real struggle to stay still and act as if she felt nothing while I was pummeling her. Grandma Madeline and Aunt Jacqueline's expressions shifted instantly as they lunged to grab me. You wretched brat. You'd better stop tormenting Jessie this instant. I had to go all the way, since I was already putting on a show. I scrambled over to Mom and Dad's side and used the exact same method, hammering my fists against their chests with everything I had. I yelled as I struck them. I don't believe it. Mom and Dad are definitely still alive. I'll save them with resuscitation. I know they can still come back. Grandma Madeline and Aunt Jacqueline, unable to restrain me, hurled curses from the sidelines as relatives surged forward in an attempt to subdue me. I figured that my outburst had gone far enough, so I calmed down and allowed them to drag me to a chair. I then feigned sorrow and forced a few tears from my eyes while saying, I refuse to believe this. I mean, Mom and Dad took Jessie out for fun just 2 days ago, and even told me that I had to find a job to pay my own tuition. I can't believe that they would suddenly die today. You're the one who issued the death certificates, right, Aunt Jacqueline? Did you perform a thorough examination? You're absolutely sure that Mom, Dad, and Jessie are dead, right? I stared intently at Aunt Jacqueline while asking that, and soon enough, everyone in the room stared at her too. Aunt Jacqueline broke out in a cold sweat. She yelled, clearly trying to steady her own shaking nerves. Of course, Lorraine. I've been a doctor for years. How could I make a simple mistake like that? How could I possibly harm Matthias, Pauline, and Jessie, my own kin? I caught a glimpse of the 3 people lying there out of the corner of my eye as Aunt Jacqueline defended herself to the onlookers. I had full confidence in my own strength. After all, I had been the one doing all the heavy labor at home since I was a child. I was certain that, even if I hadn't managed to crack their ribs, they were definitely going to be suffering from agonizing bruises. I truly had to hand it to them for being able to endure all that and remain perfectly still, especially Jessie, who had been pampered and spoiled since she was a child. In the past, if I so much as accidentally brushed against her, she would run to complain to Mom and Dad, who would beat me right after. I was curious to see just how much longer they could hold out. How long do you intend to keep acting out, Lorraine? Grandma Madeline barked, glaring at me with pure hatred. You're just so determined to turn the whole family upside down, huh? You were a headache for your parents when they were alive, and here you are, still making a scene even after they're gone. How could you be so shameless and refuse to let them rest in peace, Lorraine? Grandma Madeline might not have realized it herself, but her eyes shifted uneasily for a fleeting moment when she spoke of Mom, Dad, and Jessie's deaths. I ignored her outburst and took a slow, deliberate look at the assembly. Grandma Madeline and Aunt Jacqueline were well aware that the 3 were alive. Every bit of their sorrow was staged. Those who were present were only there to pay their respects out of a sense of distant familial obligation. It was truly laughable. In this entire sham of a funeral, there wasn't a single person who was actually sad. I suddenly realized that my maternal grandparents, Frank Green and Harper Gallagher, weren't present. Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper resided in the rural countryside, far away from where we were. In my past life, after Mom and Dad faked their deaths, I was so consumed by the need to work and repay the debt that I had no mental energy for anything else. I was working from the second I woke up, so I simply didn't have the luxury or the capacity to think about anything else. It struck me as odd that there had been no news at all from Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper. They were the ones who had actually raised me, while Mom and Dad were practically strangers. I had only moved back in with them after Jessie's birth, and when I had to attend school, I realized then that it was highly possible that Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper were completely oblivious to the current situation. Mom must have spun some elaborate lie to keep them away and stop them from checking in on me. I blurted out as I thought about this, asking, how could Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper not be here for something so important? Did no one notify them? I'll call them right now. I had just taken out my phone to place the call when I noticed Mom's fingers twitching from the corner of my eye. It was then that Aunt Jacqueline stepped forward and held my phone down, looking a little flustered. You shouldn't inform your grandparents about this for now, Lorraine. They aren't in good health, so we wouldn't want anything happening to them either. It'll still be fine to tell them when the time is right. You ought to know that the priority now is getting your parents and Jessie cremated. It's so hot out. These bodies won't last a few days before they start to smell. I've already made all the arrangements, so you don't need to worry about a thing, Lorraine. How could I possibly allow that, Aunt Jacqueline? I asked as I wiped away my tears, trying to appear both vulnerable and determined. How could I, as the daughter and the sister, not do my part? I continued. I've already made the call and arranged everything. I've called for the best crematorium in the city, and they'll be here in 5 minutes to collect the bodies. I'll just send Mom, Dad, and Jessie over directly, so you don't have to worry about a thing, Aunt Jacqueline. Aunt Jacqueline panicked instantly. How could you go and decide something like this without consulting me first, Lorraine? Get on the phone and cancel it immediately. I looked up at her, my face a mask of confusion. You were the one who said the weather was too warm, and that we had to hurry the cremation for their sake, Aunt Jacqueline. I can assure you that the people from the crematorium, who are just 5 minutes away, will make sure the process is done as quickly as possible. You've misunderstood me, Lorraine. Aunt Jacqueline protested. She had no idea what excuse to offer under everyone's gaze, so she could only pace around anxiously. They had planned it all long ago. They had recruited a team to pose as workers from the crematorium, who were supposed to pretend to take them away for cremation. In reality, they were actually going to whisk the 3 of them to the airport for their flight. I had effectively sabotaged their entire operation. Aunt Jacqueline and Grandma Madeline were incredibly anxious. After all, they couldn't just stand there and watch as the actual crematorium workers arrived to haul off 3 living people and burn them alive. I watched them turn a deep, frustrated crimson, struggling to find a single sentence that wouldn't blow their cover. I was howling with laughter inside while outwardly maintaining a mask of profound sorrow. You can rest assured that I'm not a naive girl anymore, Aunt Jacqueline. I'm all grown up and capable of handling things now. In that instant, the relatives present looked at me and nodded one after another in approval of my maturity. Lorraine has indeed matured. She has become such a responsible young lady, helping to shoulder the family's burden. I feel so bad for Lorraine. I mean, she's just about to head off to university, and then a tragedy like this had to strike the family. I know, right? I have no idea how she's going to manage from here on out. They seem to have completely forgotten how Grandma Madeline had just been screaming at me. Instead, they all stood around sighing with pity. You can have them cremated tomorrow morning. You should let your parents and Jessie remain home for one more day, Grandma Madeline ordered decisively, her gaze piercing and absolute as it landed on me. I'm an elderly woman with just 2 children. I only had 1 son, and now he's already gone. You might as well be digging a knife into my heart if you plan to have them cremated right now, Lorraine. You should let them stay in the house one more day as a way of keeping this lonely old woman company. I couldn't continue insisting on sending them to the crematorium since Grandma Madeline had made her stance clear. I'll call the people back at the crematorium and have them bring over 3 refrigerated caskets for Mom, Dad, and Jessie, since that's what you want, Grandma Madeline. I gazed outside and continued, it's nearly 109.4 degrees Fahrenheit in this July heat. If we leave them as they are, they'll start decomposing and attracting flies by morning. I couldn't possibly allow Mom and Dad, who were very particular about their hygiene, to be subjected to such conditions after their deaths. I made a strong argument, leaving even Grandma Madeline with no way to refute it. In the end, she had no choice but to settle for giving me another sharp glare. I asked a few relatives to lend a hand in lifting the 3 of them inside once the refrigerated caskets arrived. I switched on the refrigeration units and then, without a word, dialed back the thermostat in the room. I wanted to make sure they stayed cold for a while. I discreetly slipped into Mom and Dad's bedroom while everyone was occupied with the vigil outside. I started searching through their things and finally found what I was looking for, their organ donation consent forms. I immediately dialed the hospital number listed on the forms and asked them to send a team out. I then did a quick search online and reached out to several media outlets. In reality, Mom and Dad weren't actually the type to have such high ideals as donating organs. It had only happened because Jessie was obsessed with getting eyelid surgery. It turned out that the hospital was offering a 50% discount on the surgery for anyone willing to sign the organ donation consent forms. It was only after catching a glimpse of Jessie's fake-looking, deep-set eyelids that the memory finally clicked into place. In less than 10 minutes, the house was swarming with hospital staff and reporters, filling the living room completely. In a strange twist of fate, the hospital representative was none other than Gregory Fletcher, Aunt Jacqueline's supervisor. Aunt Jacqueline was momentarily paralyzed with panic when she spotted Gregory. She quickly forced a sycophantic smile and asked, "What brings you all the way out here today, Dr. Fletcher? Is it possible that the deceased are your family, Jacqueline?" Gregory asked in surprise. Aunt Jacqueline steeled herself and replied, "They're my brother, sister-in-law, and niece. Is something the matter, Dr. Fletcher? I received word that your brother, sister-in-law, and niece had passed away. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Jacqueline," Gregory said, offering his sympathies before turning to the matter at hand. "You see, your brother and sister-in-law had both signed organ donor consent forms during their lifetime, and according to the document, they agreed to donate their organs to the hospital without compensation once they passed away." Grandma Madeline immediately began to wail and protest upon hearing about the organ donation. What kind of cruel monster would do such a thing? How could you take Matthias' organs after his death? You're trying to keep him from resting in peace. I won't have it. I refuse to agree to this. It was a natural response for a grieving family, echoed by the older generation in the room, who all wore disapproving expressions. It's bad enough that they've passed away, but to have them cut open and put through that kind of ordeal is too much. It's far too disrespectful to the deceased. In that instant, everyone in the room chattered and grumbled. Aunt Jacqueline feigned a look of distress and turned to Gregory saying, "I'm so sorry, but we had no idea Matthias and Pauline had signed such a consent form, Dr. Fletcher. I think it'd be for the best if we just called off the organ donation under such circumstances." It was then that Gregory took out a photocopy of the consent form and said, "You can review it yourself, Jacqueline. You're a member of the medical profession, so you should understand how this works. You ought to know that the dead cannot be brought back to life, but their organs can save countless others." Aunt Jacqueline accepted the document and looked over the informed consent forms, which were complete with the signatures and thumbprints of Matthias and Pauline, along with the hospital's official stamp. She felt her lips twitch involuntarily as she forced a smile and said, "It's just that we, the family members, can't really accept this. Is it possible to just call the whole thing off, Dr. Fletcher?" Gregory suddenly waved his hand and said, "You see, as it happens, the son of the richest man in the city is currently in our hospital. He's been diagnosed with heart failure, and his father has been searching everywhere for a compatible heart for a transplant. They had previously run a search in the database, and your brother's heart happened to be a perfect match. He was still alive back then, so we never brought it up. He just so happened to have passed away, so the father received the news and immediately urged us to come over. He's even willing to offer $1.5 million as compensation to the family." Upon hearing that astronomical figure, every relative in the room was stunned into silence. Oh my goodness. That $1.5 million is more than an ordinary person could earn in their whole life. That tycoon is certainly generous. Those who had been loudly protesting the donation just a moment ago suddenly went quiet. Here is the continuation of your story. Grandma Madeline, who had just been screaming about the sanctity of the deceased, now had her eyes wide as saucers. $1.5 million. I could practically see the calculation running through her head. How much of that would cushion her retirement? How much would erase the very debt they were trying to saddle me with? But there was a catch. To get the money, they had to let the doctors harvest the organs, which meant killing her son for real. The silence in the room stretched thin, suffocating. I watched Aunt Jacqueline's face drain of all color. She was a doctor. She knew exactly what organ harvesting entailed. They would take Mom and Dad to the hospital immediately. They would hook them up to machines to keep the blood flowing. Ironic, since it was already flowing just fine. And then will them into surgery. There was no way out. If she refused, she looked like she was throwing away a fortune that could save the family, all for the sake of superstition. If she agreed, she became an accessory to actual murder. I stepped forward, my voice trembling with just the right amount of awe and sorrow. $1.5 million? That would pay off the house. It would pay for Grandma's care. It's what Dad would have wanted, isn't it? He always said he wanted to provide for us, even after he was gone. I turned to the reporters, who were filming everything with hungry eyes. My father was a hero. He signed those forms because he wanted to help people. And now, he can save a life and save his family at the same time. Please, Grandma, Aunt Jacqueline, don't let his last wish be in vain. The cameras zoomed in on Grandma Madeline. She was cornered. Greed warred with the terrifying reality of the situation. Her son was lying in a refrigerated casket a few feet away, shivering but alive. If she said yes, he died. If she said no, she lost the money and looked like a heartless villain on the evening news. Aunt Jacqueline stepped in, her voice shrill. "It's not about the money. It's about respect. We need time to say goodbye properly." Gregory Fletcher frowned, his professional demeanor slipping slightly. "Jacqueline, time is of the essence. The organs need to be harvested immediately to be viable. Every minute we wait degrades their quality. If your brother's heart is a match, we cannot delay." He signaled to the medical team waiting by the door. "Gentlemen, please prepare the transport." The orderlies moved toward the refrigerated caskets. Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashed in Aunt Jacqueline's eyes. She threw herself in front of the caskets, spreading her arms wide. "No, you can't take them yet. I forbid it." The reporters murmured excitedly, sensing drama. Flashbulbs popped. "Aunt Jacqueline," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Why are you stopping them? Dad wanted this. Look at the signature. Are you saying you know better than him?" I just," she stammered, sweat beading on her forehead. Grandma Madeline suddenly let out a screech, clutching her chest and collapsing into a chair. "My heart. Oh, the pain. I can't take this. If you take my son away now, I'll die right here." It was a classic distraction tactic. Everyone's attention shifted to the wailing old woman. Aunt Jacqueline rushed to her side, feigning concern. Mom, breathe." While the chaos unfolded, I noticed something. The lid of Dad's casket shifted. Just a fraction. He was freezing in there. The cold must have been unbearable. I walked over to Gregory Fletcher. "Dr. Fletcher, while my aunt attends to my grandmother, maybe we should just get moving? Grandma will be even more upset if the donation fails, because we waited too long. She's just emotional. She'll understand later when she sees the check. Gregory nodded, looking at his watch. You're very pragmatic, Lorraine. I admire that. He gestured to the team. Load them up. The orderlies pushed past Aunt Jacqueline, who was too busy fanning Grandma to stop them effectively. They grabbed the handles of Dad's casket. Wait. A muffled voice came from inside the casket. The room froze. Did anyone else hear that? One of the orderlies asked, looking pale. Hear what? I asked innocently. It was probably just the ice shifting. Or maybe the gas leaving the body. I read that happens. No, the orderly insisted. It sounded like a groan. Nonsense, Aunt Jacqueline shrieked, abandoning Grandma. She rushed over. It's just rigor mortis. Muscle spasms. Don't be ridiculous. She was desperate. She knew if they opened that lid, the gig was up. But if they didn't, her brother was going to the hospital to be dissected. Suddenly, the lid of the casket was thrown open with a bang. Dad sat up, blue-lipped and shivering violently, his teeth chattering so hard it sounded like a machine gun. I'm in and not dead. He screamed, his voice cracking. Get me out of this FF freezer. Pandemonium erupted. The orderlies jumped back, dropping the casket. The reporters gasped, cameras zooming in on the resurrected man. Gregory Fletcher looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mom's casket lid flew open next. She scrambled out, coughing and gasping, her skin pale and waxy from the cold. Help. Someone help me. I'm freezing. And then Jessie, not to be outdone, kicked her lid off and started wailing. Mommy. Daddy. It's so cold. I want to go home. The room was a tableau of absolute absurdity. 3 corpses sat shivering in their coffins, surrounded by stunned relatives, terrified medical staff, and gleeful reporters. I stood in the corner and allowed a small, satisfied smile to touch my lips. It's a miracle. I shouted, rushing forward. They're alive. Oh, thank God. It's a miracle. I grabbed Dad in a hug that was more of a stranglehold, burying my face in his freezing shoulder, so he wouldn't see my expression. I knew it. I knew my CPR worked. I saved you, Dad. Dad pushed me away roughly, his eyes wild. He was trying to process the situation. The cameras, the doctors, the fact that his death had just been spectacularly debunked on live television. Get away from me, he snarled, then realized the cameras were rolling. He quickly changed his tune, forcing a grimace that looked like a smile. Oh, Lorraine, yes. Thank goodness. Grandma Madeline stopped clutching her chest. Aunt Jacqueline stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Gregory Fletcher stepped forward, his face hardening. Jacqueline, you signed the death certificates. You declared them dead at the scene. No pulse. No respiración. Pupils fixed and dilated. He looked at the shivering trio. This, he gestured to them, is medically impossible. Unless, of course, they were never dead to begin with. Aunt Jacqueline turned white. Medical fraud. Losing her license. Jail time. The realization hit her like a freight train. I made a mistake, she whispered. I must have the shock. I wasn't thinking clearly. A mistake? Gregory scoffed. You're a senior attending physician. You don't mistake 3 living people for corpses. I'm calling the police. And the medical board. No. Grandma Madeline shrieked, for real this time. No police. It's a misunderstanding. Just a family prank. A surprise. A surprise involving death certificates and a funeral? Gregory wasn't buying it. Neither were the reporters. The live stream comments were probably going wild. #ZombieFamily was about to trend. I stepped back, watching the house of cards collapse. But I wasn't done yet. They were alive, which meant the debt was still theirs. But they had planned to leave me with it. They had planned to abandon me. Dad. I said loudly, over the commotion. Since you're alive, does this mean you can pay back the loan sharks? The ones who came to the house yesterday looking for the money for Jessie's dance school. Dad froze. The reporters turned their microphones toward him. Loan sharks? A reporter asked. Is that why you faked your death, Mr. Cooper? To avoid debt? Dad stammered. No. No, of course not. We were just sick. Deep coma. Jacqueline misdiagnosed us. He threw his own sister under the bus without blinking. Aunt Jacqueline gasped, betrayal written all over her face. You ungrateful. She started, but stopped herself. The police sirens wailed in the distance. Real ones this time. I looked at Jessie. She was wrapped in a blanket, glaring at me with pure venom. She knew. She knew I had turned up the cold. She knew I had called the organ donation team. I winked to her. Welcome back to the land of the living, family. Now the real suffering begins. The aftermath of the miracle at the Cooper house was swift and brutal. The police arrived and took statements. Aunt Jacqueline was suspended pending an investigation. Her medical license suspended immediately. Dad and Mom were hauled in for questioning regarding fraud, falsifying documents, and wasting police time. The story dominated the news cycle for a week. The zombie family became a national laughingstock. But amidst the memes and the jokes, the creditors started circling like sharks smelling blood in the water. Since Dad wasn't dead, the life insurance policy, the one they had hoped Grandma Madeline would collect to pay for their life in Pravia, was void. The debts, however, remained. And now, thanks to my helpful comment about loan sharks on live TV, every creditor they had ever stiffed knew exactly where to find them. They returned home 3 days later, released on bail. The house was a mess. Relatives had looted the food and left. The air was stale. I was sitting on the couch, reading a book, when they walked in. "You," Dad hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ruined everything." "I saved your life," I said calmly, turning a page. "You should be thanking me. If I hadn't called the organ donation team, you would have frozen to death in those boxes." "You turned up the cold," Jessie screamed. "I saw you. Before you closed the lid, you smirked." "You were hallucinating from hypothermia, dear sister," I replied. "Trauma does strange things to the mind." Mom sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "It's over. The plan is ruined. We have no money. The tickets to Pravia are useless. And the debt collectors. They called my cell phone this morning. They know we're here." "Well," I said, standing up. "I guess you'll have to get jobs. Real ones." "Jobs?" Jessie scoffed. "I'm a dancer. I'm going to the Royal Academy in Pravia. I can't work." "Not anymore," I said. "The tuition wasn't paid, was it? And since you're not dead, you can't exactly go into hiding. This is all your fault." Grandma Madeline hobbled in from the kitchen, wielding her cane like a weapon. "If you hadn't interfered, they would be safe in Pravia by now, and I would have the insurance money to pay off the debts. And I would be destitute," I reminded her. "I would be working in a factory to pay off a debt that wasn't mine." "Did you care about that, Grandma?" She pursed her lips. "You're young. You can work. Jessie has talent. She has a future. You're just ordinary." The word stung, an echo of a lifetime of neglect. But in this life, the sting didn't make me cry. It made me angry. "Ordinary," I repeated. "Well, this ordinary girl has an acceptance letter to Nexus Capital University. And unlike Jessie, I didn't need to fake my death to get it." "You're not going," Dad said abruptly. I looked at him. "Excuse me. You're not going to university. We have no money. The house is leveraged to the hilt. We need every penny to pay off the interest on the loans. You're going to get a job. Full-time. And you're going to help us fix this mess." I stared at them. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after everything, they still saw me as nothing more than a beast of burden. "No," I said. "What did you say?" Mom looked up, eyes red. I said no. I'm going to university. I have a scholarship that covers tuition. I have savings from my summer jobs for living expenses. I am leaving." "You can't leave," Dad roared. "I am your father. I command you to stay. You forfeited the right to be my father when you climbed into a coffin and left me to rot," I said coldly. "I am legally an adult. I'm walking out that door, and I'm never coming back." I grabbed my bag, which I had packed days ago. "If you walk out that door," Grandma Madeline spat, "you are no longer part of this family." "Promise?" I asked. I walked to the door. As I opened it, I turned back one last time. "Oh, and by the way," I said, "I called Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper. They saw the news. They're on their way here. And they brought their lawyer." Mom's face went pale. Her parents were old school, strict, and they despised dishonesty. They had deeded this house to Mom years ago, but there was a clause, a morality clause. If she brought shame upon the family, the deed reverted. "You didn't," Mom whispered. "They'll be here in an hour," I smiled. "Good luck." I walked out into the sunlight. The air smelled of freedom. I didn't look back as I boarded the bus to the city. I blocked their numbers on my phone. I deleted my social media. I vanished from their lives as thoroughly as they had tried to vanish from mine. University was hard. I worked 2 jobs to pay for rent and food, studying late into the night. But it was my struggle, my sweat, my life. Every now and then, I would check the news from my hometown. Aunt Jacqueline lost her medical license. She was working as a receptionist at a vet clinic. The house was reclaimed by Grandpa Frank and Grandma Harper. They sold it and donated the money to a charity for orphan children. A final, ironic slap in the face to their daughter. Mom, Dad, and Jessie were forced to move into a cramped rental apartment. Dad got a job as a delivery driver. Mom cleaned houses. And Jessie, the future star, had to drop out of dance. Without the money for private lessons and bribes, her mediocre talent got her nowhere. She ended up working at a diner, waiting tables. 2 years passed. I was in my junior year, top of my class in business administration. I had an internship lined up at a major firm. Life was good. Then I got a call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. "Hello." "Lorraine." It was Jessie. Her voice sounded rough, tired. "What do you want, Jessie?" Mom is sick, she said. Really sick. Cancer. She wants to see you. I sat in my dorm room, looking out at the campus green. I remembered the woman who had watched me eat watery broth while she feasted on steak. I remembered the woman who had planned to let me believe she was dead. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. She needs money for treatment, Jessie said quickly. We don't have insurance. Dad's wages are garnished for the debts. Please, Lorraine. You're doing well, right? We saw your name on the dean's list online. Help us. Help you? I asked. Like you helped me? We're family. Jessie cried. Doesn't that mean anything? It means everything, I said. It means you protect each other. It means you don't sacrifice one child to serve the other. You taught me that family is a liability, Jessie. And I cut my liabilities a long time ago. She's going to die. Everyone dies, I said. Some people just fake it first. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the silence. I felt a twinge of guilt, a ghost of the old Lorraine who just wanted to be loved. But then I remembered the cold. The bone-deep cold of the factory dorm in my past life. The hunger. The despair. I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and headed to the library. I had an exam to study for. Years later, I was a partner at a consulting firm. I had a beautiful apartment overlooking the skyline, a closet full of designer suits, and a life that was entirely my own. One evening, I was attending a charity gala. The theme was second chances. I was sipping champagne when I saw a waiter moving through the crowd. He looked familiar. Older, grayer, with a stoop to his shoulders, but unmistakably him. Dad. He was serving hors d'oeuvres. He stopped at a table near me, offering a tray to a group of wealthy businessmen. One of them waved him away dismissively. Not now. Dad bowed his head, humiliation etched into every line of his face. He turned and saw me. He froze. The tray trembled in his hands. I was wearing a silk gown that cost more than he made in a year. Diamonds sparkled at my throat. I looked him in the eye. He opened his mouth to speak, to say my name, to beg, to yell. I raised my glass slightly in a mock toast. He closed his mouth. He looked down at his cheap uniform, then back at me. The realization hit him. The full weight of what he had thrown away. If he had just been a father, if he had just been decent, he would be standing here beside me, sharing in my success. Instead, he was serving me cheese puffs. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the kitchen. I never saw him again. I walked out onto the balcony. The city lights were dazzling below. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. I had been reborn into a nightmare, but I had woken myself up. I had clawed my way out of the grave they dug for me and built a castle on top of it. Lorraine. A handsome man in a tuxedo stepped up beside me. It was Michael, my fiancé. Are you okay? You looked like you saw a ghost. I smiled, turning to him. No ghost, Michael. Just a bad memory. He kissed my forehead. Ready to go? Yes, I said. I'm ready. We walked back into the light, leaving the shadows where they belonged. In the past, buried deep, and finally, truly dead.